The Jesus Trilogy, Book 2, Then There Were Two, Chapter 4. The three squinted in the nearly non-existent light. The small but definite shape of the ferry boat was easing towards them from the south. Occasionally they heard a voice. They assumed it was a navigator. "You think Gadara can shoot?" "I don't know. He's lost half his blood," Barabbas said. "Well, we just have to try it. We need those weapons." The three went back and picked up Gadara. He winced and let out a yelp. "Shh," Abel said, but Gadara was still groggy and dozed back off again. They took him down to the water's edge and hurriedly made a wall of sand. They propped him up behind it and put his bow with his arrows beside him. They would arouse him just before they swam out to meet the ship. Maybe he could nail the navigator and make their job a little easier. The three sheathed their long knives and Barabbas patted his groin. The stones were still there. He thought they were a little heavy, but he was a strong swimmer. Maybe the boat would be closer to the shore this night. He prayed so. The boat was just about at the point where the three could slide into the water after it. With the right timing, their paths would cross with the boat and they could begin their assault. They awoke Gadara. The bleeding seemed to have eased, and to their surprise, Gadara reached for his bow and began to slowly test it. "Good. You think you can do it?" "I'll do it or I'll die trying," Gadara said. Abel looked down. "Don't worry, I'm too tough to die." "Good," Abel said, patting his hand in Gadara's tender right shoulder. "Ouch," Gadara said too loudly. Abel then noticed more blood coming from the wound. Gadara reflexively put his hand on the wound and mustered the energy to increase the pressure on the cloth. "Come on, get going. I'll be fine," Gadara said, and added, "Abel, I'll get that navigator for you." "All Judea is counting on you, Gadara." The three eased into the water after hiding their clothes in the woods. Each wore only a loincloth and began to swim. Their stroke was strong and rhythmic, but very quiet. All four had been doing some extra swimming of late at Abel's urging. They must reach that boat quickly but quietly. There was just a hint of first light as the three crossed the water. It was dead calm, no wind. They had to keep their stroke even quieter than ever. Surprisingly, they reached the point of intersection with the vessel ahead of schedule, so they treaded the calm water in wait. Barabbas could see the boat and also the dark figure of the forward bow of the ferry. There were only three lights. Two were torches, fore and aft, and one smaller light higher up on the second level, probably an oil lamp to give light in case one of the passengers had to move about. Barabbas suddenly jumped. Something touched his foot as he was treading water. The boat was going very slowly due to the weak wind, just enough to fill its sail, but enough to create waves. Barabbas reflexly had pulled his feet up to tread water when it became too deep to stand, but now put them down to tread with his hands. He suddenly felt the bottom again. It was a rock, and then he felt sand. He stepped forward and was soon standing on sand. Abel and Omar had the same experience. They were now all standing on sand covered by only 4 feet of water with the boat bearing down on them. "Surely the boat's draft is more than 4 feet," Abel thought, and then whispered to the other two, "She's going to run aground in this bar." "What we do, Dad? I felt a rock too. We better warn her so she can steer clear, or the boat will surely run aground and maybe even sink." "No, she won't sink," Omar said. "This will play right into our hands," Abel said. "She will be helpless in the water, and we can take control, get the weapons, stock, and get out." A toothy grin came to Omar's face. "Here she comes." There was no more time for thinking, only action. Abel, Omar, and Barabbas squinted in the nearly non-existent light. "Ready, son?" Abel asked. "Ready." Barabbas felt in his pocket for the stones, but they weren't there. He checked again, and a cold sweat instantly came to his forehead. "Dad, I lost all those stones." "What?" Abel whispered. "They're gone." "Must have lost them in the swim." "Well, we'll just have to take 'em without stones. Maybe old Gad." His jaw dropped as he saw the black figure on the port bow topple onto the deck. Abel raised his fist. Gadara had somehow done it, but despite his elation, he knew in his heart Gadara would not survive the night. He was correct. The boat was on them now. No one on the boat had noticed the navigator on the port bow go down off the boat. Everyone was fast asleep, including the helmsman at the ship's wheel. The gunwale was only 3 feet off the water. The three perpetrators eased onto the deck of the slow-moving boat. The navigator lay flat on his back, an arrow embedded in his left orbit. He was motionless and very dead. The three headed for the cargo room on the main level. Barabbas had ridden this very boat only a week ago and had explored it thoroughly. The cargo area was through a low door on the starboard side, aft. Barabbas was to stay on the bow as a lookout, while Abel and Gadara went for the cargo door. They hoped all were asleep and they could get the weapon stock and escape unseen. There was a guard at the cargo door, but his head was against the door. There he was sound asleep. Omar eased toward him, pulled a piece of twine from his pocket, and with lightning speed slipped it around the guard's neck and cinched it tight. The guard was helpless and within seconds stopped struggling for his life, collapsing on the deck. Abel put his hand on the door. Suddenly he tumbled forward, his grip torn from the door handle. Omar pitched forward as well, and Barabbas, who was standing on the bow nearby, was thrown right off the boat into the water. He came up quickly. The boat was, he saw, not moving. There was commotion and screaming on the deck. Everyone was in a panic. 2 more torches were lit as the remaining 3 crew members scrambled to get to the lifeboats. There were 2 lifeboats, but about 60 passengers on board. The boat was only 50 yards from shore, but was listing badly. The captain shouted over the din, "Women and children first." Johnny took Diana, his new bride. He pushed her ahead and then somehow got her into one of the 2 lifeboats. He was a good swimmer and he'd have no trouble swimming the 50 yards to shore. But the current that had carried the 3 perpetrators out to the Sundog was strong. Johnny quickly kissed Diana as she settled into the lifeboat and then turned to help others into the boat. When the women and children were secure in the one boat and it was lowered into the water with a crew member as a pilot, it had only been a couple of minutes since the Sundog had hit the rocks covering the sandbar. With the boat now listing badly to port, Johnny helped the other crewmen lower the other boat. That left about 20 men on board who would have to swim for it. Meanwhile, Abel had recovered from the lurch of the boat and had gotten into the cargo hold. It was filling rapidly with water. In the confusion, no one had noticed Abel or Omar. Abel grabbed the bags in the hold and filed through them. Then he saw it, the seal of Rome. This was it. He looked around for a bar to pry it open. Finding none, he took his knife and pried it open, breaking the tip off as he did so. The water was now halfway up the open cargo door. He grabbed a handful of the long, gleaming swords and passed them out to Omar. He got another handful. They were heavy, but Abel and Omar had brought some spongy flotation devices strapped to their ankles, which would give them enough buoyancy to allow them to get back to shore with the swords. Must have been 100 weapons. Abel realized he couldn't take them all, so after getting a dozen for each, he and Omar floated back on deck. But to his dismay, a man was holding Omar at sword point. Johnny had noticed the dead navigator on the bow and alerted the captain, who quickly deputized Johnny. They had Omar's hands tied. "So what are you 2 up to, you little traitors? You sabotaged my boat and killed half my crew." Abel was about to argue that the crew were all asleep anyway and it was their own fault the boat ran aground. But the Sundog suddenly lurched further to port and the captain slid right into the water. Omar went in also. His hands were tied and he let out a scream. "I can't." He never resurfaced. Johnny took one of the swords laying on the deck. He had somehow stayed standing and he was a huge man, 6'4", 235 pounds. "I'll teach you to threaten my and Diana's life." He lunged at Abel and ran him clean through, just under the 4th rib below the right nipple. He went to pull the sword out, but the boat suddenly lurched again and flipped completely on its side, sending them all into the cool water. The boat sank like a rock to the sandy bottom some 60 feet down, rolling off the edge of the sandbar and into the deep water of the channel. Barabbas had witnessed these events, but now struggled to stay afloat himself. The draw of the boat as she sunk was very powerful. After what seemed like an hour but was only 30 seconds, he was able to surface. The tremendous force of the downward suction had now weakened him and the others. Johnny and Abel had now resurfaced also. The sky was now brightening considerably. Barabbas saw his father and called to him. "Dad, you okay?" "Come here, son, I'm hurt." Johnny was only 10 yards from Abel. His first urge was to finish the job, but he realized the wound was mortal and so turned and swam towards shore. He prayed his Diana would be all right. Barabbas came up to Abel from behind, but he immediately noticed the blood on the water. Then he saw the gleam of the sword handle. It was flush against his father's chest. "Dad!" he screamed. "Somebody help!" But all the survivors were headed for shore in the process of saving their own lives. The current was strong and was carrying them all north, parallel to the shore instead of towards it. "Dad, what happened?" Abel did not respond except to gesture with his head toward the shore. Travis got behind him, and keeping his body away from the very sharp toe-edged blade, he began to paddle toward the shore. His father, who was lapsing in and out of consciousness, let out little yelps from time to time. The sword was impossible for Barabbas to completely avoid, and its edge began to nick his left flank area almost with each stroke. He continued to back paddle. As he neared the shore, he realized the grunts coming from his father were less frequent and eventually stopped completely. Tears welled up in his eyes. His father was dying. His mother and his sister would be heartbroken. He couldn't live without his dad. A panic suddenly seized him and he stopped swimming. The tears were replaced by a cold sweat. He started to sink, but he wasn't sure he cared. They didn't get the sword shipment. Gadir and Omar were probably dead. No more 6 points. Who would fight the lousy Romans now? He couldn't do it alone. Suddenly he felt a hand on his shoulder. It brought him quickly back to reality. "Need some help?" It was Johnny. Barabbas recognized his big fullback instantly, even in dim light. "Yeah, he's run through the sword. I don't think he can make it." "Here, let me help you. Quarterbacks are such weaklings." Johnny knew he shouldn't have said it, but that was his way. A bunch of other things were also racing through his mind. He was terribly worried about his Diana. Wasn't sure if he would ever see her again. He saw the blood coming from this man that he was helping Barabbas bring to shore and realized the man was beginning to stiffen. It was too dark to make out features, but he suspected this man was the man who was attempting to rob the ship and that he had run the guy through with a sword. He did not know why Barabbas was helping him to shore, but at this time chose not to ask. Barabbas had the other man's arm, and they back-paddled against the current the remaining 25 yards to shore in silence. Somehow they continued to make progress, Barabbas' father in tow. As the three neared the shore, the current became less strong. Barabbas suddenly felt the bottom with his foot. He took a few more strokes and then was able to stand. "I'll get some help," Johnny said weakly with a tinge of anxiety in his voice. "Thanks, fullback. I'll never be able to thank you enough. At least we have a decent burial. Johnny, will you help me find his killer?" Reflexively, Johnny said, "He's probably swimming with the fishes." Unbeknownst to Johnny, it was a lie he would regret to his dying day. He turned and began a slow trot toward the light of Capernaum. The pit of his stomach began to well up. He was too anxious to piece things together at this point, but he suspected the dead man was a close friend of Barabbas. But why was a friend of Barabbas a thief? He suddenly stopped in his tracks to relieve the overwhelming nausea that had now overtaken him as the bright crescent of the sun eased over the Galilean horizon. Barabbas now began the slow, sandy walk to the shore. He had to rotate the now lifeless body of his father onto its side. He pulled the large man up onto the shore a few feet from the water's edge. The gentle waves lapped the sand. He He cradled his father's head in his hands and began to cry harder than ever he had. From his father's chest flowed a slow, steady river of blood. It pooled in the sand, and from this pool a small river wound through the sand a few feet towards the water's edge, where it disappeared in the now shimmering Galilee water, now bright with the yellow-orange haze of the sun half exposed on the horizon. Rabbit stared at his father, then the sun, then back again. He noticed the glint coming from his father's dog tag. He idly fingered it as the tears continued to run down his face. Abel 040182, it read. He turned it over and read 46.